All right, looks like we're live. Welcome to Saturday Night AMA. I am your host, IllumiGnostic, and I realize it's kind of a lofty sounding title tonight. Unlocking secret superpowers with plant medicines and psychedelics. But the research is there to support it. The anecdotal evidence is there to support it. And my personal experience definitely supports it. It's actually a sort of rare circumstance that something transcends the hype. And psychedelics is one of those cases. There are two reasons why, I think. The first one is that the nature of the animal, right? People associate psychedelics with delusions, schizophrenia, psychotic episodes. All of these things psychedelics can aggravate, catalyze, lend themselves to. So it's not without basis. At the same time, a lot of the experiences that people have that sound like something from a psychotic episode are actually real. And there's a very famous magician that once said about this, that the mysteries always present themselves in a way that casts doubt upon them. And so I think this association of telepathy, precognition, remote viewing, all these sort of preternatural capacities of consciousness that our culture has so much doubt about, sort of emerging from the situation where people have taken a psychedelic drug is a great example of that. And it's one of the reasons why these compounds are not actually really getting the full recognition, and not just recognition. I don't want to use the word exploitation, but deployment. People are not even deploying them to their greatest advantage because there's so much doubt and skepticism around one of their central powers. And we'll get into that in more depth. Another reason is that people just don't have the skill set to make the greatest investitures from their psychedelic experiences. And the reason for that is the same reason that we only have one Einstein, one Plato, one Bob Dylan, the list goes on and on. All of these truly great minds are the exception. And there's a wonderful movie called Waking Life, where the main character can't really tell if he's dead or having a lucid dream or what exactly is going on. And he just keeps finding himself in these conversations with all these really interesting people, talking about really deep stuff, right? And at one point, he encounters this old man who says, human history has basically been an addition of more and more zeros without any greater value being achieved. Why? The answer to that question is another question. What is the most common human attribute? Fear or laziness? And so, to really fulfill the possibilities that psychedelics represent, a person must have developed willpower, discipline. They must embrace intellectual discourse and study, because if you inflate one side of the mind without giving attention to the other, you will become out of balance. You see this in academia when people are completely abject materialists. They will not even give space to the idea that nature could be intelligent. And it's not just that they're not open to the supernatural, because really in the context of the mysteries or the kind of gnosis, I guess, that I teach, there's no room for woo. There's no necessity to accept that impossible things are real. I don't. But even when a path is shown, when a mechanistic basis, if unproven, can be at least very strongly implied, a good case made for the possibility, people that are trapped in that mentality cannot even entertain things that are beyond certain parameters. At the same time, when someone tries to believe in spiritual concepts without any basis, just because they're popular or because they suit them, the same sort of derailment happens, but in a different fashion. So the reality is, even just to be a good mystic, forget about the psychedelics, or to develop a really deep-rooted spiritual life, that has substance and balance. You have to balance the pentagram, is how it's expressed in the Western tradition. You have to give equal attention to all of these different points in order to create a star that can shine brightly, So for me, this medicine holds vast potential, not only in the realm of healing traumas and bringing humanity back into homeostasis with nature, with ourselves, but the evidence of my senses, and this is corroborated by so many others throughout history and all sorts of different cultures, is that our consciousness actually has capacities that are beyond the parameters that we generally accept in Western society. And so my plan for tonight was to kind of have an AMA and let you guys lob questions. In lieu of that, I will talk a little bit about, let's see, I see some questions. What do we got? An experience with the grays and ayahuasca. I don't exactly have that, but I do have a story that I'll share with you, since we're talking about these sort of expanded capacities of consciousness or whatever. Ayahuasca really first gained interest from anthropologists and explorers because there were numerous reports, even somebody as famous as Sir Walter Raleigh is amongst their numbers. And the reports from anthropologists, early on, and they were dealing with uncontacted people. There's no way they had seen a television set with the pyramids or, excuse me, the Empire State Building. I just inhaled some coca paste and I have no water. They couldn't possibly have escaped the jungle to see these things. And yet these shamans could describe, in one case, supposedly a particular street corner in China, the pyramids, all sorts of things they couldn't possibly have witnessed. In the case of Sir Walter Raleigh, the shaman said, I can know anything when I drink the vine. And Sir Walter Raleigh said, okay, then tell me something I couldn't know. There we go. And the shaman said, your sister is dead. And he received a letter a few days later informing him that his sister had died. So there was so much of this stuff over the years that the Harmala alkaloids in the vine were originally called telepamine and telepathine, which I think became tetraharmaline and harmaline. Sorry, guys. And so this actually resulted in 1963, I believe the experiments took place. In 1966, the book was published, which was also, ironically, the year that psychedelics were banned in the U.S., at least LSD was. And Gene Masters, PhD, and Houston, PhD, Masters in Houston, they wrote a book that was a nod to William Blake's varieties of religious experience called The Varieties of Psychedelic Experience. And in this book, they detailed all these experiments they had done before they were shut down. And one of them was that they had people separated by many floors. One of them drank ayahuasca, and the other one looked at pictures that had been drawn by volunteers of really abstract stuff. So, like a skier skiing down a mountain that was on fire, and there's a UFO hovering. And the accuracy of the person that had drank the ayahuasca, I might actually have to go get some water, was like 99% or something insane like that. There was a lot of interesting stuff in that book. If you can find a copy of it, I would strongly recommend reading it. Man. Enrica, if you're down there, bring me some water, please. Where was I at with this? Oh, yeah. And another really interesting thing that happened is that they injected 1,000 volunteers with DMT. And of those that saw God, 90% of them said that God was a jeweled cat. So, you know, all sorts of wild stuff. But for our purposes right now, what I'm getting at is that before ayahuasca became a trendy tool for healing stuff, thank you, my love. Excellent. All right. It was used to get information through non-ordinary means. The shaman drank it in order to heal. A lot of people don't realize this, but by and large, the collective group ayahuasca ceremony thing is not traditional at all. There are some tribes that did this routinely, and there are some that did it on sort of special occasions. But for the most part, the shaman drank and he diagnosed the patient. And he also drank and then would go and look at the plants in the jungle and say the one that could use to be treat a certain type of snake bite would turn into that snake. And then he would know to use that plant. And the mechanism behind that, we actually know. Biophotons. Not going to sidetrack into that quite yet, though. All right, so getting information through non-ordinary means, and there is tremendous evidence that this is a real thing. You know, ayahuasca telepathy also is as real as the air I'm breathing and the desk in front of me, and I know that with 100% certainty. But the original question, I am getting there, had to do with aliens and ayahuasca, right? So, I'm not going to go super in depth and tell all the details of the story because I've told it before on the channel. I'm just going to kind of give an overview of this. But there was a mystery that I lived with for many, many years. And it started after I left a conference, I guess, with Golden Light Eagle, who was a Sioux Sundance chief and a Hawaiian medicine man and a bunch of tribal spiritual leaders, but not just that. There was also like Japanese Zen master and, people from all different traditions, extraordinary people, all of them. And they had a message that was basically that there are star tribes that humanity has been into contact with for tens of thousands of years. Some of us are telepathically connected to them and don't even realize it. And all this sort of stuff. And I would have just laughed it off, except that they did things like, there was a ritual and the Hawaiian medicine man said, "May the wind blow to confirm the power of our prayer." And the wind blew so hard that gravel blew across the parking lot. And all sorts of stuff like the entire weekend, So I was kind of forced against my will to take them seriously. It was impossible not to. And so on the way home, I had this vision of this like purple geisha demon sort of looking thing, but it wasn't evil. I knew that. It was just, it had horns. And it wasn't moving. It didn't talk. It was just kind of translucent and kind of hovering in front of my face as I'm driving. And then it vanished, and it happened maybe twice. And then many years later, I was playing my guitar. My girlfriend was watching. And when I was done, she said, "There's like this, faint silhouette of this like horned purple demon thing floating behind you when you're really concentrating." And I didn't really take it that seriously. I just said like, Satan is my spirit animal or whatever. That's metal as fuck. And, just whatever. And then it happened. Dustin, and then this Maori kid, I don't know his name. So two other people mentioned it. And I didn't put it together with this vision that I'd had, 5-6 years earlier. Until I came to South America, I drank ayahuasca, and I'm walking back to the teepee from the bathroom, and Pachamama says, "Remember this?" And she puts the purple alien thing there. And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Would you like to know what that is?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, you know how two particles can be in, or one particle can be in two places at the same time, but it's not two things, it's one thing in two places." And I said, "I've heard this." And she said, "Okay, well, that souls are like that too. And this is you as you exist on this gas giant that didn't become a red dwarf star because of the influence of the other two stars." And, in the interest of sanity, no matter how weird things get, I always take things with a grain of salt. And so I thought, all right, well, that's cool, and there was a bunch of other information. Like I said, there are videos that I've made that tell the whole story. And I go back into the teepee and I tell everyone what happened, because the talking stick goes around and you're supposed to discuss. And I stopped and I said, also, she told me to mention or acknowledge that there was someone else here that the Star Tribes had some kind of interaction that they wanted acknowledged. And this girl burst into tears when I say that. And she said she had been out walking around and a light shot down from the stars. And, then bearing in mind, I'm still thinking this whole time, all these people are on ayahuasca. I mean, but then it occurred to me about a week and a half after the ceremony to Google it. And I discovered that there was a wobble that had been spotted on Sirius B centuries ago, and that they had finally determined 5 days after the ceremony where I received this information that it was likely a gas giant that didn't become a red dwarf because of the influence of their two stars. I don't know anything about astrophysics, so the chances that I would have generated this on my own, not very good. So at this point, I'm starting to take this seriously, especially in light of the fact that the Blue Lodge, the Blue Star in the Masonic Lodge, represents Sirius. The Hopi have the Blue Star prophecy, which is Sirius. Both the Masons and the Hopi have secret handshakes that they use to identify people that are keepers of the secret knowledge. Then, a few weeks after all that, I find out that the Sequoia, who are an ayahuasca drinking tribe in Cuyabeno, which is in Ecuador where I was at the time, they claim to be in telepathic communication with beings from Sirius. They point at Sirius and say, "We talk to these spirits from this star when we drink ayahuasca." So that's, the best I can do at answering that question. Oh, also there's more to it. Is it it's not the Zulu, the Dogon in Africa also claim to have this connection with Sirius B, and the same sort of stories, So again, I'm not, it's very important when you have these kind of experiences not to attribute too much importance to them. I can't find the right words. It's not importance or validity, because at that point, that's pretty well established, But in the long run, I don't really know what to make of it. It could be that there is a universal mind and that we are somehow connecting with this, and it doesn't literally have anything to do with aliens on a glass giant. But the reality is that I received information pertaining to astrophysics that hadn't been published at the time yet, that I wouldn't know anything about. And then I discovered that there's all these people, including an ayahuasca drinking tribe, that claim to have contact with beings in the same star system. Bunch of coincidences, or either way, clearly it's something that is worthy of our attention and further investigation. And along those lines, one of the most important things that I feel like I can offer to this conversation, only because I don't see it represented that much in the conversation elsewhere, is this ability to access information through non-ordinary means with ayahuasca, DMT, and other psychedelics. In fact, the first time I really experienced telepathy to the extent that it was absolutely undeniable It was just a small amount of mushrooms, and I was a mile away from my girlfriend, and she knew every single thought. It was a hypothetical conversation going through my head. She knew who the hypothetical person was, nothing we had been talking about, and she knew every word, and she knew everything I had been doing. I mean, every little detail, what type of dog I stopped to pet, a tear ran down my eye, the whole thing. So, it's a bummer, I guess, to me that there isn't more attention kind of being put on these areas. And I get it. We're trying to rehabilitate the image of psychedelics, and things like telepathy, precognition, communicating with beings in other star systems and all this stuff. That is not really the path to mainstream acceptance, Would I recommend skydiving on shrooms? I wouldn't take a large dose, but I think it would probably be safer, really, on a small dose. And this is something that's worth discussing as well. I talk about unlocking secret superpowers and whatnot. LSD and psilocybin brain scans have been done, and the same scans were done on master monks while meditating. And there was electrical activity in parts of the brain that it's never been seen before with LSD and psilocybin, which means that when you take these compounds, you have access to parts of the brain we do not normally use, and that not even master meditating monks have access to. And that is wild. That is really, really wild. Also, I can't recall the name of the documentary, somewhere on YouTube, but the theme of it was specifically people that are able to do things that they can't do normally when they take psychedelics. In the video, there was a juggling couple, and they couldn't juggle. They take 100 micrograms of LSD, they could juggle like maniacs. There was another person, their face was blotted out, but according to this mystery individual, X Games athletes will take 100 micrograms of LSD before competitions, and it's considered cheating, but it's like standard practice. And because it's considered cheating, because it improves your response time, balance, every aspect of your functionality that you can conceive of. You're using more of your brain. You have all this neurogenesis happening. Your connectivity of the different parts of the brain is greater. Your subconscious and conscious mind are interacting in a way that they do not normally and cannot normally. And so, again, the trick is to get the dose right. If you take too much and you're overwhelmed and you become confused, it's not going to serve your purposes. And even for a novice, any amount may be difficult. In California, we called it developing your acid muscles, because we would use LSD and MDMA to enhance our playing at shows. And actually twice, this band was told by people that were professional musicians or industry. One was a professional musician, the other was an industry professional, that he had noticed that we weren't even that good when we weren't tripping. But when we were tripping, it was one of the most extraordinary things he'd ever seen. And that's the reality. It can make that much of a difference. And for all those people out there that would say, shouldn't you be able to do these things without any chemical help? You don't do anything without chemicals. It's like saying, why don't you go to the moon with no spaceship? It's just a technology. It's a tool. You can use a tool or not. That's your preference. But the reality is that you're not going to be able to compete with someone that is, using 40% more of their brain than you are. It's just, this is just common sense, Not getting a ton of questions tonight. I don't have a ton of time, so if anybody has, yeah, and I didn't really have a plan tonight outside of, what happened? Did my internet die or something? Outside of answering questions, so let's see, what else is I've made videos about the applications of different psychedelics. This is, and also plant medicines in general. Plant medicines do not have to be psychedelic in order to have efficacy. In fact, I would say Blue Lotus has some pineal gland opening effects, and lucid dreams. It definitely is something that connects you to flow state. You can enter into flow state more easily. Lucid dreams are a tremendously useful tool. So even more to the point, Sananga is amazing medicine. And I'm not going to say it has no psychoactive effect, because if you drink it, which I first experienced the other day, I have a video on the way. Hopefully it's a lot of translating. And his Spanish wasn't great. He's Matsis. And, for example, he asked me what the name of this thing over here was during the interview, and I turned around and looked, and I was like, La Montaña? The mountain? He did like basic Spanish, so it's a difficult project translating. It's taken a second. But at any rate, it does contain ibogaine in small amounts. But the point is, when you take a few drops in your eyes, it's not a powerful psychedelic unless it's taken at the peak of an ayahuasca experience, in which case it is like... It's difficult to describe, but it's kind of like a shower for your soul, that your inner being feels like it's just being shined with divine light, and all of the garbage and dross and crap is being blasted out of your soul in the most gentle, amazing way. The visions increase a lot, and the Quichua say that it dissolves panema, which is basically like heaviness, or... what do you call it when you're procrastinating a lot, lack of motivation. People don't want to work. That's how Carlos, the Matsis shaman we were working with, well, shaman's the wrong word. They don't have ayahuasca or psychoactive plants. It's not really a shamanic tradition, just a healing tradition. But they gave us Kambo and Sananga. And so, some of these things are not necessarily psychoactive, but can still lead you to a place of healing. Tobacco, for example, is a much maligned and misunderstood plant. In our culture, we associate it with death and disease and addiction and cancer and all of this juvenile delinquency, all this kind of stuff. But in the jungle and also in the Andes, it's considered one of the most important healing plants there is, and it's actually true. I had a tremendous anger problem for a number of years, and I was convinced to drink tobacco with this ex-girlfriend who was, her mom was an indigenous person from Uruguay, and her father was a Viking or something. And weird combination, and so anyways, it works. It really works. Also, I had a client that was fresh out of a psychotic break, and Kambo, Sananga, and tobacco almost 100% leveled him out within a matter of a week or so. Not 100%, but from being seriously disconnected to just, barely off, I guess. And none of those things are really very psychoactive. So I just felt like it's worth noting that all of the things that fall under this kind of umbrella have proven capacity to really have a tremendous impact, to increase mental focus and even to stabilize a person that has lost their way. And I mean, like that, rapidly. One application of Gesaleu Rape, actually, I have 2 people now that said that it was, a dramatic change that has persisted after one single application, so, what stuff am I currently tripping on? I'm definitely not tripping on anything. Somebody asked, do I use Hape? Yes, I definitely do. Have I ever tried Harataki? I've never heard of it. Do I believe in ancient alien theories? I don't believe in anything without real solid evidence, and I don't think there is any for that. There is, I think, evidence that people had access to a wider frequency range of consciousness than we give them credit for, at the very least. It's absolutely possible. There's some evidence. But my experience, I had a contact experience. I hate to even admit that because, people think you're nuts or whatever. But actually, everyone I ran into the next day in that town, all of my friends had seen them as well, gave the same description, but they were translucent, like holograms. And so I've wondered, is it possible that time travel is easier if you are in a state of pure information, like a hologram? Light could be sent through time a hell of a lot easier than an actual corporeal being. So, I think when we see these evidences of, possibly advanced technology, the pyramids, for example, the latitude or longitude is exactly the speed of light. And then people say, and it's not just that, there are like several dimensions that are related to this. And, and then people argue, well, it has to be a coincidence because they didn't use longitude like we do, or miles per hour. And I think it's crazier to think there's no connection, right? Especially considering that the mysteries that were observed in the holy places of the pyramids were basically, they revolved around light, like every intelligent spiritual tradition in the history of the planet and probably beyond, So to me, that is proof of a universal mind. Also the fact that Mercury, if you hit it with the right voltage and knock a proton off, it becomes gold. Mercury, the planet, is right next to the sun, which is the symbol of gold. The people that name those things did not know that. Our consciousness comes to us on the light. Soul, S-O-L. When you individualize it, you put you in it. Soul. Right? Like, these things are not coincidences. They are evidence of an underlying consciousness, to me, at least. So that's, I guess, my answer to your ancient aliens theory. No one knows. Unless I go back in time and shake hands with one of them, I don't know. But is there evidence that there is more to reality than blind reductionist materialism? I think you have to be brainwashed or mentally disabled to think otherwise, really. How do you differentiate between genuine spiritual insights gained through psychedelic use and mere hallucinations or drug-induced fantasies? The issue with that is that people who are in a place where they're susceptible to these delusions and drug-induced fantasies are not going to be able to distinguish the difference, and they're not going to want to, usually. Ego inflation. Usually these delusions are related to messiah complexes, and, they're generally egoic in nature. For me, when I was going through what I call the Phoenix process, which was a period of very rapid spiritual development that was, so many things happened that were so strange that I was definitely questioning my sanity. It turns out that I was sane. And the way that I checked that in part is that when I saw something that I found to be provocative of, or indicative of this line, this twilight line, I would keep my mouth shut and wait for someone else to acknowledge it. And those sort of checks and balances, this actually leads me to a really important part of this discussion, which is that in the 1960s, when people started taking a lot of psychedelics, they would talk a lot about consciousness expansion. But I think it was something people felt compelled to do, but they didn't really know what they were doing and what to expect. We see the sort of boomer hippie generation of psychedelic progenitors, really, at least in our culture, as having failed. They gave up and they went back to their jobs and they started voting for warmongers and, became yuppies and three-car garage and just forgot about it or something. But the reality is they didn't have the skill set that we do. They didn't have access to the information. They didn't have access to the same type of tools. And we do, so that's a huge element of this that we have to really take seriously and put into play. You have to realize that when you expand your consciousness, the parameters of what's available to you to experience actually do change. And that is, I think, the underlying cause of a lot of people thinking they have hyper persistent perceptual disorder. That's not it, actually. It's really just that when you bring these filters down with psychedelics, they don't go all the way back up, and they're not supposed to. It is an evolutionary adaptation that we have this filtration system in the first place. Because if you could always see these pulsing energies and patterns and all of this stuff all the time and hear other people's thoughts and whatnot, you couldn't manage, But as we evolve and we are able to wield power with more responsibility and to walk with knowledge wisely, once we're adapted to be able to carry the burden of greater sensory perception, that we're going to get it. This is how nature works. This is how the universe works. And so it is a difficult thing, because without the training, without a village shaman, without the hierarchical system of the mysteries, there's no one there to say, okay, you are not out of your mind, but you are becoming, slightly telepathic, or, you've had accurate precognitions. There are actually tests in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, for example. Certain things will happen in your mind's eye during ritual that have no obvious connection to anything you're doing, for one thing. And there's a sealed envelope. And when you report to the person above you that you have seen this thing in connection with this certain archangel, they tell you open the thing, and then you realize that this is something that happens to everyone. You know what I mean? There are supposed to be gradated steps to this, and you're supposed to have someone to help you and to monitor you and to make sure that you're able to remain grounded throughout this process. It's a very unfortunate circumstance that we don't have that in our culture, and because of social media and also the profit motive. So people want to engineer these systems for maximum marketability, which means that you downplay the amount of work it actually takes to become a good manifester. And, the people don't like tedious study and all this stuff that is not as marketable is diminished and de-emphasized. So that's really, there's no one size fits all answer for this. But the best I can do is describe the dangers and give some kind of protocol. The problem is, once somebody hits that ego inflation spot, there's no advice that's going to help them, really. It's something that people just have to work their way through, But once you have a few precognitions that are undeniable, the tendency is to start to believe that all of these things that you think are all precognitions, and then you're chasing wish demons to hell. People destroy their entire lives because they've experienced a few of these, and you can never be sure if they're not just entirely coincidence, no matter how improbable it is. When they start occurring in aggregate, you can have more confidence. But that's a very common circumstance. The way Aleister Crowley put it is, the magician's most common mistake is to think that his magic can do more for him than it can. And this is something that, unfortunately, really only error can teach truth. These opposites create each other in those ways. And almost all of us, there are very few that are so lucky that they're not wise too late, rich too young, and wise too late. That's the general circumstance, and unfortunately, this is where wisdom generally comes from. Another good gauge is that, and people hate to hear this, but a good gauge of this stuff is that impossible things don't happen. Everything that happens has some sort of mechanistic way to play out as long as you're on this dimension. Not even God himself, should he exist, can suspend the laws of nature in order to perform a miracle. It will never happen. It cannot happen. If it did, the universe would come apart at the seams. So that's a good way to check yourself if you're feeling ungrounded. There has to be some sort of conduit for things to happen in the real world. People oftentimes get this, the new age is such a toxic movement because of this. People get this idea that they can just manifest anything by thinking about it. And so they invest their belief in that and then go completely off the rails on the woo-choo train. So, yeah, there's that. Brandon says you can't get powers without doing the work. Unfortunately, that's not exactly true. What happened to me, I guess, and this is why the structure of having an integrated protocol where you're developing the intellect, you're developing your willpower, you're developing your discipline, simultaneously as you're developing this sort of spiritual connection and prying open your third eye and all of this sort of thing. I had not sufficiently addressed my traumas and my self-sabotaging tendencies and all of this stuff before I accessed an uncanny ability to apparently manifest the reality I wanted. And so it was kind of like being in hell, because I would create these extremely improbable, dream-fulfilling scenarios, and then I would torch them right at the finish line every single time. And so, this is not an experience that's unique to me. It's so common that Mickey Mouse, was it Mickey Mouse? Yeah, Mickey Mouse in Fantasia. He steals his teacher's hat, his master's hat, and he's trying to make the brooms and the tools do all the work for him, and he ends up almost drowning. That was a reference to exactly what I'm talking about. And it is the rule almost rather than the exception. So I disagree that you can you can't access it. I did the work, but I did it in the wrong order, I guess. And that's what brings us back to this absence of protocol and hierarchy and a respect for the shamanic tradition and the office of the mystic and the shaman in our culture. We don't have that, therefore we don't have the guiding lights. And then when these things enter into the collective and they start to create a movement, as they're doing at the moment, these forces, influences, it basically creates havoc for a lot of people. And that also hurts the movement, because then people that have the expectations that have been formulated in their minds by the propaganda, it looks to outsiders as if the propaganda is true, at least to some kind of extent. So this is something we all really have to be really mindful of and do our best to take responsibility for if we're trying to really be part of a meaningful movement. And since I just mentioned the government and the propaganda, this is something that we always need to bear in mind, right? And you can research this yourself. Look at Humphrey Osmond, was one of the people involved. There was a book that he wrote that tells the whole story. I wish I could recall what it, at any rate, at no point did the researchers commissioned by the United States government report back and say these substances are dangerous and destructive and they need to be banned. That's not what happened. The report said it is unprecedented in the history of psychiatry that a single medicine could be efficacious in treating so many psychological disorders, often in a single dose. And that's actually from Johns Hopkins in 2015, I think it was. The original quote from, I think it was Michael Hollingshead or Humphrey Osmond, one of the two, was almost identical to that. And so the reason that the feds outlawed these compounds was not to protect people. As Terrence McKenna said, 35 years ago, whatever it was, psychedelics are not illegal because a loving government doesn't want you to jump out of a window. As far back as the ancient Egyptian empire, The mysteries, which involved the consumption of some mysterious psychoactive compound in the Eleusinian mysteries, it was called the kykeon. And a lot of people suspect that it's a combination of, well, not a combination, but a fermented ergot, which is where LSD comes from. A fermented ergot fungus beverage, right? I doubt that, because the experimentation process with ergot would have cost people a lot of lives and really terrible deaths. It's sort of like getting mercury poisoning, only you're tripping. So that would have discouraged experimentation. And the fact that acacia and Syrian rue grow in all the places where the mystery tradition transitioned through, better bet, I think. And it's very similar to the effect to ayahuasca. So whatever it was, that was the deal. And according to this book here, written by 33rd degree Freemason Albert Pike, and in case you're not aware, the Freemasons are a direct, antecedent of the mysteries, the original mysteries. And he says in this book that the pharaohs and the magistrates in Egypt realized that people that had been illuminated could not be ruled. And so in order to protect the aristocracy or the establishment or whatever, they sent these magistrates undercover in there to steal the secrets of the mysteries and turn them into religions. This is where the one God thing came from in Egypt, where they killed the old system and replaced it with this, what is the word? It's escaping me at the moment for monotheism. So luckily, Pythagoras had come to Egypt, and he was initiated in the mysteries, and he took this knowledge and this plant mixture and brought it to Greece, where they had the kykeon, and the inner circle was the apoptyae, and so the inner circle were people that had had this drink. And again, the Roman magistrates were sent in to steal the knowledge and to pervert it and to create Christianity with it in order to control people. And so my point is, a lot of the people in the federal government were well aware of what psychedelics really are for, what they do, and what would happen if the genie got out of the bottle. And then Big Pharma also is saying, what do you mean you can cure alcoholism? You can cure, drug addiction and violence and all of these things. No. It's our domain to make money off of these people. And they don't cure, they just make customers, So that's what really happened. It had nothing to do with protecting people at any point. It was mostly about the fact that these compounds had the ability to liberate the minds of the slaves and servants that the overlords depend on to keep the cogs in their machine moving. That's the facts. And then if you think about the societal cost of this, I think the average for smoking cessation with psilocybin is 85% better than any other treatment. The same goes for ketamine and PTSD and anxiety. And there are numerous, 85% seems to be the mean for all of these things. So if you consider how many less drunk driving accidents there would have been, how many less lung cancer victims, how many less homicides, how many less PTSD, mass shootings from, vets that come back traumatized and whatnot, it's unthinkable. It's been 50 years. So, and then on top of that, the fact that we would have so much more productivity from the human race, so much more creativity, so much more freedom of expression, so much more tolerance, so much less depression. And, the cost of psychedelic prohibition has been almost incomprehensible. And it's pretty damn well unforgivable. Yeah, Brandon says I was violent from abuse and trauma until my first LSD trip. I also was pretty violent. It wasn't really my first LSD trip. that got rid of it, but it definitely was mushrooms that, leveled my head and got my like abusive, traumatic, white trash upbringing out of my system, So I don't have a bunch more time right now, but I would like to mention, just in closing, of course, I do streams on these topics all the time, so there will be more. But I just want to encourage everyone out there, that if you embark on this path, to please try to take heed of, the advice that I've given, to expand your intellectual real world knowledge in lockstep with your expansion of your consciousness. Also know that time and time again, I see people begin the process, they get a bunch of momentum going, and then they hit a wall, and then they start coming up with every excuse they can think of to avoid continuing, because there's this shadow lurking, and the subconscious drive to avoidance and abandonment becomes overwhelming. It's actually the norm, And when that happens, you just have to find a way to push through, because the reality is this: there are two components to living your best life that are absolutely essential and unavoidable. The traumas that are sabotaging you have to be directly confronted. They have to be identified, neutralized, and in positive action, a map has to be created in order to override the influence. And then, after this is completed, you must figure out what your true will, your fundamental purpose, what it is that you are in this world to do. And until you complete certain tasks, that will not be available to you, And even if you discover your purpose without resolving the trauma, you are doomed. And it's just going to be worse, because it's to be able to create heaven and then watch it destroyed right in front of you is almost worse than never having done it. Take it from me, I would know. Yes, God Porter, go ahead, ask away. It'll probably take him a second because I have quite a lot of lag on this internet. And by the way, we're having one more Mountain Gnosis event in November where it will be hopefully raining. So we'll be able to collect morels and forage for medicinal and wild gourmet mushrooms. And, all the other stuff that we normally do, going to ruins. And then in May, we are going to Manu, and we only have a couple of spots open for that. So I wanted to make changa, but don't know a good way to do it. If you look on my channel, you will find a way to make changa with totally natural components, but it assumes you have access to fresh ayahuasca vines. I can't really get into, how to make changa in this context because I have to have a disclaimer. But basically, you just have to have something that contains harmalas, and you have to do an extraction, and then you have to do an extraction with something that has DMT, and then you need to put them together. And that's, without having a disclaimer, because of the algorithm, I really can't say any more than that. So let me check the other chat for questions. By the way, guys, please hit the like button, share, subscribe, consider becoming a patron, because I am demonetized and get nothing from YouTube for advertising or whatever. So if you appreciate this content, it is amazing if you support us. And there are also links to my WordPress that has affiliate links, and the Patreon. You can get access to 5 years, I think, of premium content, blocks of FaceTime for consultations and all sorts of other delights. So what hallucinogen did the Inca use? There's some debate about that. The Inca almost definitely used psilocybin mushrooms. At least the Incan Empire was huge. So at least in certain areas where they were abundant and available, you got to remember that it's likely that cubensis were not, they were not cattle, Cubensis mushrooms there are miles and miles and miles and miles, like almost wall to wall in some parts of the jungle where there's a lot of cattle. But back in the day, that wasn't really the case. So That, and they were aware of ayahuasca, San Pedro, coca. In fact, they did engage in child sacrifice, and they would keep the volunteer, as it were, awake for like a week with coca leaves, and then they would give them a large dose of ayahuasca on the night of the sacrifice. So unfortunately, due to the conquerors, the colonizers, destroying even their own records of the Incas' beliefs and traditions and stories, we have no idea what the ruins really looked like before they were decimated. There's really not nearly as much known about the Inca as certainly I would like. But yep, that's one of the consequences of colonization. All right, guys, thank you so much for spending this time with me. Please hit the like button, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. And I will do a part 2 of this. I was going to talk about the differences between, ketamine, MDMA, ayahuasca, DMT, because there's overlap in the application of all of these compounds. They all will help with depression, anxiety, addiction, but they're specialized. So some of them target certain areas better than others, and some of them can aggravate things that others will only help, and vice versa. So if this is a situation where you have to do this work on your own, you definitely should know these things so that you know what medicines to choose and which to avoid and how to apply them. So maybe in the next part of this, I will focus specifically on that type of education. So thank you guys so much for spending this time with me, and I'll see you again soon.